Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. It's time for the C3 stream. Hey gang, good evening, hello. Welcome to the C3 stream. Welcome to Tuesday night teaching, everybody. Last week I had a sick kid. Thanks for bearing with me. The child is much better now, thank you to modern medicine. And we're back at it. Tuesday evening, back at rocking and rolling in Luke chapter 6, where we left off previously. So, very happy, very pleased to be back and rocking and rolling. I do have a cup of tea tonight. I'm drinking turmeric ginger tea tonight. And I'm sporting this mug. See if you guys see that. Be careful. You'll end up in my sermon. So, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for joining us tonight. We are going to be picking up where we left off. I guess it would have been 2 weeks ago in Luke chapter 6. Last week I invited you, because we couldn't really talk about it, but I invited you to read where we had left off previous. If this is your... Sorry. Whoa, skipped right past the intro. What am I doing? If this is your first time, so glad that you're here. Welcome to the C3 stream. We are in a narrative look of the Bible. We're currently in Luke chapter 6. A narrative look means that we are kind of taking a story-based approach to the Bible. And if you go way back, like way back, we started this all off in Genesis, and we've been tracking all the way up to the time of Jesus, and we've slowed down when we hit Jesus. We slowed down when we hit Luke, and we are really just going kind of verse by verse, line by line, slowly working our way through the Gospel of Luke. The reason we're doing the Gospel of Luke is because Luke is the first part of a two-part, really what was always intended as a two-part or a two-piece within the scriptures themselves. Luke and the book of Acts are the same author, and it's really the Gospel of Luke is part 1. The book of Acts, or sometimes referred to as the Acts of the Apostles, is book 2. And so what we're doing is we're kind of going to the first one, and then we will pick it up with Acts after that. So that's why we chose this Gospel. Luke chapter 6. Starting at verse 37, which is picking up actually with a parallel. If you joined us on church on Sunday, if you joined us on Sunday, this is what I had a chance to preach on just from the book of Matthew. Matthew, Luke, and Mark are what we're referred to as the synoptic gospels, synoptic. And when we use that term synoptic, it means that there's a whole lot of overlap between those three particular gospels. Book of John, totally different ballgame. Gospel of John is a totally different ballgame. But Matthew, Mark, and Luke, those three, Matthew, Mark, Luke, all have incredible overlap, with Mark being the primary text. That Luke has a lot of Mark, Matthew has a lot of Mark, and then Matthew and Luke have some overlap, but certainly the heavy idea is, and we saw this with the opening of Luke, that when the author of Matthew and the author of Luke sat down, they probably had a copy of Mark with them. Like, I know that sounds silly, but or kind of bizarre for us to conceptualize because we have it in the package that we do right now. But at the time when Luke was being written, we find in the opening passages, the opening sentences of the Gospel of Luke, that remember Luke sets down to write out a thorough account, taking into account all the other written accounts that are out there, like, for example, Mark. So, all right. Luke chapter 6. Hey, gang. Yeah, you all are there. I see you. Hello. Good evening. How we doing? How's everyone doing tonight? Anything new to share? Anything exciting? How many of you actually read the Luke 6 chapter? Anybody actually read it? I invited you to read it last week when I had to watch a sick kid. But Luke 6, verse 37, begins off, do not judge others. Let's pop over to the text. You guys ready to start rocking and rolling and getting into the scriptures themselves? Let's do it. Let's pull that. Barksdale's here. Barksdale's. Hey, Chris. How you doing, man? There you go. All right. Here we go. This is where we left off, and you can see, yep, Joe read it. Nice. Thanks, Joe. Appreciate you, man. Thanks for the book. Joe sent me a very kind book. I'm excited to read it. It's about running, about an Olympic runner. So, do not judge others. Do not judge others. Always good. Swell. Glad to hear it, Chris. So if you had a chance to join us on Sunday, this is the text that I preached on. But just a side note, the references that I gave you were from Matthew. So as a reminder, Matthew and Luke both have some significant sermon content from Jesus himself. Jesus gives a sermon. In Matthew, it's referred to as the Sermon on the Mount. I know this is about to be very confusing. In Luke, the exact same content, the exact same sermon is referred to as the Sermon on the Plain. Yeah, I know, it's confusing. Maybe you could imagine it like this. Jesus stood on the plain and everybody else was sitting on the mountain, and there was like a natural amphitheater, and Jesus would teach. There are a couple places, if you go with Pastor Bob to Israel in 2023. I think I misspoke the date a couple weeks ago. I thought it was 2022, but it's Israel trip. Let me see if I can find it real quick because I don't want to do it wrong again. Israel 2023 is I'm pretty dang sure. Anyone know? Is it 2022 or 2023? What did they call it? Holy Land, didn't they? 2023. All right, so that I have it. Real quick, shameless plug. Holy Land tour coming 2023. PB is going. And then with Pastor Wayne Scaff, who has extreme experience. He's dedicated much of his life to taking groups to the Holy Land in a pilgrimage. Here are the dates, 28th through March 11th, 2023. Start planning, start thinking about it now. This will be Wayne's 48th trip to Israel, and third with PB, which is pretty sweet, pretty cool. That's pretty awesome. So 2023 will also include a few days in Rome, Athens, or Jordan. So you get a little extra spice in there. You can fill this out if you are curious about more for the Holy Land Tour. All right, shameless plug over. Let's go back. So if you go to the Holy Land with BB in 2023, you will go to a place that some people suspect the Sermon on the Mount, the Sermon on the Plain actually happened. There's like a chapel there, and it's a really incredible. It's a natural amphitheater, so it's flat land, and then all of a sudden it kind of like scoops up, and it's a hillside. It's a hillside, and you stand at the bottom, and they demonstrated it when I had a chance to be there, and you could hear the person at the bottom crystal clear. I mean, it was a natural amphitheater, crystal clear. It's just a hill. I mean, you're just sitting on the side of a hill. It was pretty incredible. The point of me sharing all this with you is to say the Sermon on the Mount and the Sermon on the Plain are the exact same thing, just and cover the same content, really. One comes in Matthew, and it lasts for 5 chapters. Luke is a little more succinct. It only lasts for 1 chapter. So the entire chapter of 6 really is the meat of chapter 6, has to do with Jesus' teaching. And where we kind of left off, we kind of had our Beatitudes. You guys remember those? Of course, it's an abbreviated Beatitudes section, as opposed to what we get in Matthew. He brings in the sorrows and the woes. We talked about that. And then we finished up with love for enemies. This is kind of where we left off last time. And just like in the Gospel of Matthew, same thing here in the Gospel of Luke, this has to do with how to follow Jesus. Like if you're going to be a follower of Jesus, if you're going to be a disciple of his, he is laying out these expectations. He's laying out for you his teachings. He's laying out for you what it means to follow him. So it should not surprise us that in the same way in Matthew, we get this do not judge comes up in the book of Luke. But just like we heard on Sunday, this is one of the silly things that Christians say. This is a bad header. This is a bad header, right? Because this is the quote, do not judge others and you will not be judged, right? This is the bad quote when you take that out of context. You need to read it within the larger context that this is Jesus teaching what it means to be his follower and how his followers should relate to one another and to people in general. Do not condemn others or it will be all come back against you. Forgive others and you will be forgiven. So here, even in the Gospel of Luke, you have this emphasis that yes, there's a measure of judgment and there's warning in relation to judgment, but it's always anchored with forgiveness, which is fascinating as well. Now, there's still a warning here. Like there's a warning about how you treat people, right? Let's not be let's not deny the reality. Yes, I agree, Trudy. It is amazing. Trudy, you and Dave were with Pastor Bob on the previous trip, I believe, weren't you? I think you were. If memory serves, you went to Israel, and so you might have gotten a chance to see that. I can't remember for sure, but I think you were on the trip before. So do not judge others, you'll be judged. Do not condemn others, who will come back against you. Forgive others, and you will be forgiven, right? So he's talking about a disposition of the heart and the ways in which we treat one another. We should, and he follows it up. He actually follows through kind of this practical description with a metaphor, kind of a descriptive. Give and you will receive. Your gift will return to you in full. Pressed down, shaken together, and make room for more, running over and poured into your lap. Right? So the idea here is picking up on the idea of this is like a marketplace. This is what you would experience if you went to the marketplace to go buy grain. You would go and you would buy grain, and you would either bring a sack for grain, or you would just quite literally hold up your tunic, for lack of a better way of describing it, and you would be measured out, right? Your grain would be measured out for you. And the idea here is pressed down, shaken together to make room for more, running over and poured into your lap, right? So, even as we have this warning about judgment, it is grounded in this concept of forgiveness, and particularly the overwhelming gracious nature of the gospel. The gospel is meant to be running over, poured into your lap, like overflowing, right? The amount you will determine, the amount you give will determine the amount you get back. So he's going into the details of, hey, how you treat your other brothers and sisters in faith, will be the same measure by which you yourself are treated. The ways in which you interact with people, you can expect to have correlating responses to. That's why it's so important that you ground yourself in love for your brother and sister, because in the same way, you too shall be able to receive love, and you too shall be able to experience, overflowing grace and forgiveness and compassion, even when you make mistakes. So this is the parallel, these couple verses, of what you heard on Sunday. Now, there is one small note here. 39 and 40 do not appear in the Matthew text, but then we pick up in 41, which we talked about on Sunday as well, from the Matthew text. So this is a slight insertion here where Luke gives us a little extra here. Jesus gave the following illustration. Can one blind person lead another? Won't they both fall into the ditch? The blind leading the blind, right? Students are not greater than their teacher, but the student who is fully trained will become like the teacher, right? So the aspiration here is that if we are students, another way to translate, see if it does it give, yeah, okay. So another way of even translating students is disciples, okay? So another way of translating that in the Greek would be disciples. Let's look the word up real quick. Pupil, apprentice, as contrasted with teacher, pedagogical reputation, yeah, disciple, adherent. Yeah, okay. So this is the same word that we would get like disciples from. Jesus is basically saying, look, you need to strive to emulate, reflect the great teacher, Jesus Christ, right? And so when you consider judgment, which is part of the Christian calling, on Sunday, we made that clear. If you missed Sunday, just a word of encouragement to go back and watch. One of the silly things Christians say is Christians don't judge, or Christians shouldn't judge. And it's taking this verse, do not judge others, out of context and applying bad theology, right? The reality is, yes, Christians do judge. Christians should judge. Christians are actually called. It is part of the Christian calling to judge. But you have to do it with the right people and in the right way, which is what we talked about on Sunday. This too, as you can see from the Matthew text, Luke, he is preaching and teaching to Christians about what it means and what it looks like to interact with other Christians. So this has to do with us living according to life, death, resurrection of Jesus and his teachings. We are to be grace-oriented. Give, you will receive. Your gift will be returned to you. Okay? And so, in the middle of this whole judgment piece, he slips in there, hey, remember the good teacher, the great teacher, the ultimate teacher that we are striving to be like. Don't be a blind person following the blind. No. You need to be a good disciple, student, following the teachings of your teacher. And then we get into verse 41, which we talked about again on Sunday. Why worry about the speck in your friend's eye when you have a log in your own? How can you think of saying, friend, let me help you get rid of that speck in your own eye when you can't see past the log in your own eye? Hypocrite, first you get rid of the log in your own eye, then you will see clearly enough to deal with the speck in your friend's eye, right? And so on Sunday, we talked about how, a Christian executes judgment from a position of their own judgment, right? You have to be very careful and have humility, a position of humility, when you exercise accountability among fellow Christians. It is part of what we do as Christians for the sake of one another, but you have to do it the right way. Okay. Let's see. You guys talking at all? Yeah, judgment is so incredibly dangerous. Correct, Chris, because so many people do it so the wrong way, and it gets taken out of context so many times. It's just so incredibly important that people understand judgment is part of the Christian call. It just has to be done the right way. Otherwise, it is so incredibly dangerous. You're absolutely right. Yeah, when I went on the first trip, I don't remember trying out the acoustics. Maybe you had a chance to, maybe you didn't, Trudy, but it was just probably one of the spots you visited. I remember it vividly because the guy we were with made a big deal about it. All right, the tree and its fruit. I'm sorry. One of the things Jesus is doing here is he's going into a set of parables. He's giving us sets of parables that he is unpacking. Okay, so here's another piece of that parable. So he gives us 4 parables here to conclude his Sermon on the Plain. He does a lot of parables in the Sermon on the Mount too, but on the Sermon on the Plain, he gives us 4 here. A good tree can't produce bad fruit. A bad tree can't produce good fruit. A tree is identified by its fruit. So it's tree. You know a tree is a tree by its fruit, right? What kind of tree it is. Figs are never gathered from thorn bushes. Grapes are not picked from bramble bushes. A good person produces good things from the treasury of a good heart. An evil person produces evil things from the treasury of an evil heart. What you say flows from what is in your heart. Right? Now, there's a couple things in saying this. One is to say, you don't want to go too far into some theological ideas. First off, there is no such thing as a good person. Okay? Let's just be clear. Let's be clear. There is no such thing as a good person. That's why Jesus came. The idea, what Jesus is speaking to and what he's teaching to here isn't in that theological line of thinking. What he's getting to is the summary statement here. What you say flows from what is in your heart. He's drawing on the concept in the parable of recognizing, hey, as a disciple, you are called to bear good fruit. Okay? So even though, yes, I understand this whole good person versus evil person and what is really in your heart stuff, like, don't get lost on a theological train that isn't supposed to stop at this station. This is intended to say, look, it's not enough just to hear the gospel. You're supposed to live out the gospel. You're supposed to embrace the gospel. You're supposed to be an active disciple, not just simply a disciple who wanders through life, but you're supposed to actually be implementing the realities of your faith. You should be transformed. You should be changed. You should be, right, to be a disciple is not just to hear the teachings, but you're supposed to exhibit those teachings. And so Jesus is drawing upon the idea of fruit as a way to help get at that, to say, hey, you are now being identified as a disciple. And as a disciple, if your identity is truly a disciple of Jesus, there will be practical implications. There will be fruit in your life as a result. Okay? And so that's what he's talking about here, transformation. And, he's talking to a bunch of people who are sitting down listening to him. Right? They're sitting on the plane. They're all sitting there listening to this Jesus guy because they want to hear what he has to say. And he's saying, hey, he's spending all this time. Look at all these red letters, right? Boom. Look at all that red stuff. He's giving this big, long sermon. And then he gets to this tree part and he's like, look, everything that I've been teaching you matters. So don't just listen to what I'm saying. You got to be changed by it. You got to be transformed by it. You got to let it inform your life in the way in which you live. which also seamlessly transitions into his final parable, building on a solid foundation. This too appears in Matthew, but it goes by a little bit different quirkiness to it. Why do you keep calling me Lord, Lord, when you don't do what I say? See, now we're getting into the crux of it. I will show you what it's like when someone comes to me, listens to my teaching, and then follows it. All right, so this is what he's doing. He's talking to all these people who, have been wandering around following him for a little while now. He's deep into his ministry practice by now, and so he's delineating between those who say they follow him and those who actually put into practice what it means to follow him, right? He's saying it's like a person who's building a house who digs deep and lays the foundation on a solid rock. When the floodwaters rise and break against the house, it stands firm because it is well built. But anyone who hears and doesn't obey is like a person who builds a house right on the ground without a foundation. When the floods sweep down against that house, excuse me. Oh, I'm sorry. Tired. When the flood sweeps down against the house, it will collapse into a heap of ruins. This is ginger turmeric. It's not chamomile. Does ginger turmeric tea make you sleepy? I'm not sure. We've just been rock and rolling all day and just fatigued. Okay. This is actually one of my absolute all-time favorite parables that Jesus gives us. Though I'll admit I prefer the Matthean, the Matthew text a little bit more. This one gives the idea of like a river rising up and flooding, right? But the concept's same. It's parallel. Foundation of the solid rock. Basically, Jesus is saying, look, what are you going to build the rock? What are you going to build your foundation on? What are you going to build your life on? What are you going to build your identity on? The Matthean text, the Matthew text here, picks up on like storms and waves will come. It juxtapose building on the rock versus on like sand. All of the ground is sinking sand. What's that? What's that song? On Christ the solid rock I stand. All of the ground is sinking sand. Yeah. The solid rock. It's a great song. Old school hymn. Love it. So this is Jesus putting the exclamation point on his big, long sermon. Boom. Do what I said. Don't just hear what I'm saying. Do it. Be my disciple. And then it transitions. After we get this big, long, look at how long that sucker is. Right? So let's go up to 6. Where's 6 start? All right, so we're coming past, just a refresher, we're coming past his conflict with the Pharisees and all this sort of stuff. And the Pharisees aren't going to follow him, right? And so then we get this whole question about what does it mean to be a disciple? What does it mean to follow him? What does it mean to be an apostle? So he chooses the apostles. He chooses his apostles from among the disciples. And then addressing all of those who are following him, he gives this big, long sermon about what it really does mean to follow him. So it actually makes, if you zoom out that idea, he has conflicts with the Pharisees, and then he delineates and separates those who actually are going to follow him. He chooses from among them his closest apostles, his closest disciples, and then he just gives his basically his baseline teaching to everybody about what it means to follow him. So that's kind of what happens all in Luke 6. So it's a rather large chapter, meat-filled chapter. All right, chapter 7, faith of a Roman officer. This is a fun one. I like this story. I like this story a lot. This story happens in... Well, John's got a similar story, but it's a little different. Mark? No, it does happen in Matthew. Okay, it happens in Matthew. I stand corrected. I thought it was in Mark. And it happens in Matthew at the exact same place that it happens in Luke, right following the Sermon on the Mount. Yeah, Matthew 8 would be right at that, So it's coming out of the Sermon on the Mount in both respects. All right. When Jesus had finished saying all this to the people, so after this big old teaching, he returns to Capernaum. Capernaum is his home base for all of his ministry. It's up in Galilee. It's a small fisher town full of fishermen. It's mostly Jewish. It's up on the shorelines of the Sea of Galilee, and it's really his home base. It's where Peter and Andrew and James and John all live. It's where they had their fishing business before becoming full-time disciples. This is where Peter's mother-in-law lives. It seems to imply that Peter would have had a family that stayed in Capernaum this whole time. So this is his digs. This is where he rocks and rolls. Capernaum, that's Jesus's go-to place. At that time, the highly valued slave of a Roman officer was sick and near death. Let's check the translation notes here. Yeah, centurion. So when it translates Roman officer, the Greek's centurion or centurion. So it's a highly valued slave. Now, just a little bit of context for you. Rome in slavery is different than what you think of slavery related to the United States and the history within America. This type of slavery was, I mean, it's still slavery, but it's different. That's as clear as mud. Slaves within the context of the Roman Empire were sometimes indentured servants who could work themselves out of slavery. Sometimes a slave or servant would be so valued by a Roman family that they would get adopted, or that they would actually be put in positions of such high credibility, they would run the house, they'd run the estate, they would become the most powerful person in the family, despite being technically a slave or servant to the family. So this does not surprise us that, like, when it says at this time the highly valued slave of a Roman centurion, so this is probably a servant or a slave who is close to the Roman officer, the Roman centurion, like emotionally, relationally close to him, means he's not just like economic, maybe that's a better way to say it. He's not just bringing economic value. When it says value, don't think economics within the context of Roman society. Think much broader, that this slave brings it's far more than just simply a economic value to the family, which is why, undoubtedly, the Roman officer and the centurion does what he does. At that time, the highly valued slave of a Roman officer was sick and near death. So this Roman officer's slave is about to die. What does he do? Well, when the officer heard about Jesus, he sends some respected Jewish elders to ask Jesus to come and heal his slave. So the centurion entreats and asks that some respected Jewish elders. So clearly this centurion has relationships that are rather significant in the context and in the community. I mean, it's not just anybody that can go and pull a favor, even by some of the nuance of the language and the grammar here, right? It's not like the Roman officer can order Jewish elders to do things. Particularly note that these are respected Jewish elders. Judaism and Rome didn't mix. Like, the Jewish elders would not have mixed with the Romans. We'll find out more in a little bit about the officer and why he has such a good relationship in just a verse or two. But he's leveraging, for all intents and purposes, this is a good guy. Like, this Roman centurion is like a legit dude. And he hears about Jesus and he cares for his servant, his slave. And so he sends some of these elders to come and ask Jesus to come, right? Get Jesus here so that maybe Jesus can do something. So they earnestly beg Jesus to help the man. So even the fact that the respected Jewish elders, I'll get to why this is all important at the end. Trust me, it's important. He sends some Jewish, these elders earnestly beg Jesus. It's not like they even just show up and give him a letter. Like, these Jewish elders are lobbying. They are appreciating and valuing a pagan Gentile. What? But these respected elders show up and beg Jesus to come and help the slave. If anyone deserves your help, he does, they said, for he loves the Jewish people and even built a synagogue for us. Oh, all right. Now we're getting somewhere. Basically, The Roman centurion is what is sometimes referred to in the Bible as a God-fearing Gentile. All right? He is on good terms with the Jewish people, respecting and appreciating the Jewish faith, to the point where this guy built a synagogue for him. And remember, a synagogue is like a city town. It's the town center. It's a big deal. I mean, straight up. It's a big deal for a Roman Gentile, not a Jew, to go through the process. He builds it. What's implied here is with his own coin, right? That he funds it, which is also, again, why we see, and this is why he's got such good relationships. All this is painting this Roman officer really, really, really nicely. This is important. Now, remember, the Gospel of Luke has a very broad, big picture perspective of Gentiles. Jesus doesn't come just to the Jewish nation and just to the Jewish people when it comes to the Gospel of Luke. If you read the Gospel of Matthew, it is all about being Jewish. This is an example of how the Gospel of Luke broadens a sense that Jesus is Messiah, not just of the Jewish people, but of the Gentile world as well. In fact, this is, if anything, this story forecasts another dude that we meet in Acts later on, Cornelius. Cornelius, and the story of Cornelius parallels this in some great, fabulous ways. Roman centurion, God-fearing, good man with the respect of Jewish people, right? This is basically laying groundwork for saying Jesus is a Messiah for the whole world, Jew and non-Jew, which the book of Acts will spend a great deal of time proving. He's laying the theology in Luke and proving it in Acts. That's why this is also important. And thanks be to God that he does, because this is why, I don't know about you, I do not have Jewish roots, so I'm really glad this all took place. Why? Because it means, as a Gentile, there's space for me. This is all really important, guys. This becomes the centerpiece, one of the centerpiece conversations for the entire book of Acts is, and even for Paul's letters. Like if you read Paul's letters, Galatians, Ephesians, I mean, you just read his letters, and easily the biggest tension, First and Second Corinthians. We were talking about First and Second Corinthians on Sunday. We were talking about First Corinthians, the story from First Corinthians. The whole idea here for Paul is that he has realized the Jewish Messiah is meant for the whole world, and that's why he's got to teach pagans how to live according to Jesus's teachings. They didn't even have the foundation of Jewish theology to work with. The entire book of Romans is a theological work explaining the interplay between the Jewish faith and the fulfillment of Jesus as the Messiah. So all this can be kind of felt and seen as groundwork for that everything that will follow with the larger church. All right, getting back to the story. So Jesus went with them. Look at that. He goes with them. So he responds positively. Rather than simply just saying, nah, he's Roman, Jesus says, okay. But just before they arrived at the house, the officer sent some friends to say, Lord, don't trouble yourself by coming to my home, for I am not worthy of such an honor. I am not even worthy to come and meet you. Wow. Talk about one impressive dude. This centurion has such a position in heart, a disposition for humility, right? Here, according to the world, the Roman officer could be calling the shots. He could abuse his power by trying to force Jesus to come. But instead, as Jesus is on the way, he sends a delegation to say, hey, Lord, don't even trouble yourself. I am not worthy of such an honor. I'm not even worthy to come and meet you. And then this is where it gets particularly interesting. Just say the word from where you are, and my servant will be healed. Oh, this is interesting because this has to do with the power of Jesus in relation to spoken word. Basically, he's saying here, just say the word. Say the word. Wherever you are, whatever is going on, you simply name it, Jesus. You speak it into existence, and it will be so. I know this to be true because I am under the authority of my superior officers, and I have authority over my soldiers. I only need to say go, and they go, or come, and they come. And if I say to my slaves, do this, then they do it. So here he's picking up on this concept of authority, which this is not the first time in Luke that we've seen the concept of authority being tied to what Jesus says. Let me give you an example. Up until now, we've had a couple of chances where Jesus meets up with some demons. And what does Jesus do? With a word, he casts them out. And then the people are stunned that he has authority. He has the authority over demons and over diseases. With a word, Jesus heals. And the people are stunned by Jesus' authority to cast out disease. With a word, Jesus forgives. Right? We saw that with a paralytic. Do you guys remember the paralytic story? I'm not going to go back up to it. Remember with the paralytic? Where it's this whole thing of like, just so that I can prove to you that I have the authority to forgive sins with a word, that I have the authority to forgive sins with a word, he then heals the dude, right? So this is a huge statement in and of itself as well that has to do with Jesus. Whatever Jesus says goes. He has the authority to speak reality into existence. God has given him the authority. If you go to the Gospel of John, this is very strongly felt with the close association with divinity and the exploration of Jesus's divinity. Even in the opening chapters of John, you know what? Let's have some fun. Let's go to John. I want to show you how this is really big in John. In the beginning, the Word already existed. The Word was with God. The Word was God. He existed in the beginning. God created everything through him. Nothing was created except through him. The Word gave life to everything that was created, and his life brought light to everyone. The light shines in the darkness cannot extinguish it. Of course, if you use this word, this is the Greek word here is logos. This is also a title that is given to Jesus Christ. So in the beginning was Jesus. Jesus already existed. Jesus was with God. Jesus was God. He existed in the beginning with God. God created everything through Jesus, and nothing was created except through Jesus. Jesus gave life to everything that was created, and Jesus's life brought light to everyone. Later on in verse 14, aha, the Word became human and made his home among us. He was full of love, unfailing love, and faithfulness. We have seen his glory, the glory of the Father's one and only Son, a.k.a. Jesus. So, the concept here of word and the power of spoken word, John is very clearly a big proponent of the importance of spoken word as well. All the Gospels are. In Luke, we find that power here, right? We find the power here to suggest that. Those are some of your favorite Bible verses, Susan? I love it. Well, that's wonderful. I didn't know that. Yeah, John 1, 1-5. You knew it. So this is just a really big statement because it's an acknowledgement in the Gospel of Luke, just like we find in the Gospel of John. Whatever Jesus says goes. Like when Jesus speaks, when Jesus says, it happens. It goes. It works. It's done. There's no beating around the bush. There's no, this is why as Christians it's so powerful when we preach and when we teach. This is why when we preach and teach, the emphasis as Christian people, particularly at Christ Church, we are word and sacrament people, because faith and transformation happens when Jesus himself speaks. And so we believe in our theology that when me or Pastor Bob, or through a song or through whatever, even through your fellow brother and sister in faith out in the atrium, as Jesus shows up and speaks through someone, it's spoken into reality for your own life too. So when we say like you're forgiven, it really happens. By Jesus's authority, it actually happens that you are actually forgiven. Not supposedly, not theoretically, not someday. No, it like really happens. If you go to the 8 o'clock tradition service, we do confession and absolution. And absolution is a definitive word whereby, and I even say, by the authority, with Jesus's authority and with his voice. Like that's the line. That's what I say. And the idea there is I am no longer speaking, but it is Jesus speaking through me as his vessel. And he's speaking his words of forgiveness. He's exercising, Jesus exercises his authority through me as the pastor in that moment to exercise forgiveness. So this is a really big deal within the Christian faith. So, this whole story of the faith of the Roman officer, it's a big story. It's a huge story because it tackles the issue of Jesus for the whole world, and then it combines it with Jesus proclaiming is the fancy word, Jesus and the power to proclaim into reality based on his word. When Jesus hears this, he is amazed. He's amazed at the willingness of the centurion, a non-Jew, to simply believe that Jesus has the authority to do these things, that whatever Jesus says goes. Turning to the crowd that was following him, he said, I tell you, I haven't seen faith like this in all of Israel. Now, this is not a condemnation of Israel, all right? This is not a condemnation of the Jewish people. This is not, all right, I'm showing my bias there. I don't believe that this is a condemnation of Israel. That would be out of sync, I think, with the biblical text here. What this is trying to do, I would argue the case is getting back to that broader perspective, saying like, look, faith is not exclusive to Israel. You don't have to be, Jesus is more than just the Jewish Messiah. You don't have to be Jewish. Faith exists in the centurion, and that surprises Jesus because of how significantly present it was. It's kind of cool also to think, Jesus was surprised, amazed. Kind of neat to think about how we can amaze him and surprise him by what we say and do sometimes too. Kind of cool thought. You have to be careful with that statement. And when the officer's friends returned to his house, they found the slave completely healed. Boom. Let's really quick. Let's jump to it in Matthew. What did we say it was? Matthew 8. And take it to here. Okay. So this is Matthew 8. Same story. Jesus returned to Capernaum. Roman officer came, pleaded with him, Lord, my young servant lies in bed, paralyzed in terrible pain. I will come and heal him. Lord, I'm not worthy. I'm under authority. Do this, do that, go, come. Right? So we actually get more detail from the Lucan text. Luke gives us the details of like the Jewish people and the Jewish elders and the whole synagogue thing. We don't get any of that in Matthew. It's just boom, straight to it. The emphasis in Matthew is, ironically, has far more to do with the tension of the Jewish people. When Jesus heard this, he was amazed. Turning to those who followed him, he said, I tell you the truth, I haven't seen faith like this in all Israel. And I tell you this, that many Gentiles will come from all over the world, from east and west, and sit down with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob at the feast in the kingdom of heaven. But many Israelites, those for whom the kingdom was prepared, will be thrown into outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then Jesus said to the Roman officer, Go back home, because you believed, it has happened. And the young servant was healed that same hour. So you can feel the tension in Matthew. Matthew is written to the Jews, and this is a warning, right? This is a warning to say, hey, so you don't have exclusive rights. You do not have exclusive rights to the faith. So while in Luke, it's much more of a positive framework, Jesus for the nations, Matthew is much more of a Jews, hey, this is a warning to you. Okay, so you can kind of feel some of that. Let's really quick also go to, let's bring up, since we got the time. Let's bring up Cornelius. No. What's the quick person search? Somewhere in there, there's like a person search. People. No. Oh, you know what? Let me try this over here. Let's do the power lookup. No, be dag. Sorry, please be patient. I'm looking for something because I want to show you that it's relevant. It's relevant, I promise. Cornelius. Acts 10. Take me there. All right. So, okay, here's Cornelius. And I wanted to show you guys this because it all ties together. This happens in the book of Acts, which is the second half of Luke. Okay, like we talked about before. In Caesarea, there lived a Roman officer named Cornelius. And so here again, you get centurion, who was a captain of the Italian regiment. He was a devout, God-fearing man, as was everyone in his household. So here's an example of, a Roman guy who, his whole household was... They're Gentiles, but they believed in the Jewish faith and Jewish way of life in a lot of ways, right? He gave generously to the poor and prayed regularly to God. All right, so interesting. He's marked by radical generosity and prayer. Those are his two markers of proof that he was devout and God-fearing. Generosity and prayer. Kind of cool. One afternoon, about 3 o'clock, he had a vision in which he saw an angel of God coming towards him. Cornelius, the angel said. Cornelius stared at him in terror. What is it, sir? He asked the angel. The angel replied, your prayers and gifts to the poor have been received by God as an offering. All right, so here you go. You want to make God smile? Pray and be generous. There you go. Not rocket scientists in that regard. God receives them humbly, happily, as an offering. He's pleased by them. Now send some men to Joppa and summon a man named Simon Peter. He is staying with Simon the tanner, who lives at the seashore. As soon as the angel was gone, Cornelius called 2 of his household servants and a devout soldier, one of his personal attendants. He told them what happened and sent them off to Joppa. So here's the parallel. You guys can feel it, right? You can feel how the Luke 7 text prepares us that when we read this in Acts, we're like, oh, like Jesus cares, God cares about, Jesus cares about Roman officers. We've seen this before. We know that they can have faith. We know that they can be cool dudes and dudettes. And of course, what happens, we won't go into it now because we'll go into it when we get to Acts, but Peter comes and he actually spends time with Cornelius. And God uses this experience to break open Peter, interestingly enough, break open Peter's perspective to embrace the non-Jew. Up until now, Peter is this faithful Jew who wants nothing to do with the Gentiles and really sees Jesus as being exclusively for the Jews. And it takes this, even though Peter is theoretically around during this, he's not quite getting it, right? The disciples are here. The disciples have been chosen. They're witnessing the experience with Jesus here, doing all this for the Roman officer. But it takes Cornelius, in the experience of Cornelius, for Peter himself to realize, oh my goodness, I see very clearly now that God shows no favoritism in every nation. He accepts those who fear him and do what is right. This is the message of the good news for the people of Israel, that there is peace with God through Jesus Christ, who is the Lord of all. And he goes on and he preaches to Cornelius's family. And they all convert. Stinking awesome. The Jewish believers who came with Peter were amazed. The gift of the Holy Spirit had been poured out on the Gentiles too, for they heard them speaking in tongues and praising God. This is, I mean, I cannot underscore how big this is. These stories lay the groundwork for the entire tension of Jesus for the world, as opposed to Jesus being just a Jewish Messiah. These two stories really set the baseline for that. That's why I'm spending so much time on it. I just wish I could grasp for you how significant that is. You get a picture, literally, since Abraham, as the Abrahamic promise has been passed down, the whole idea was exclusive. God is exclusive. God is exclusive. God is exclusive to the Jewish people, to the seed of Abraham, to the people of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so for the very first time, we see Jesus doing stuff for those outside of the Jewish faith. We see God working. This is no different than when we find the Samaritans. Have we tackled Samaritans already in Luke? I can't remember if Luke's got many Samaritans. John does. John's loaded with Samaritans. We get the whole many people. They like come from all over. But I don't remember Samaritans in Luke yet. No. Nope. No Samaritans. No Samaritans. Though we do get the emphasis of geographic expansion from Luke. It's very Luke. Geography getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. That's very Luke. That the gospel goes out bigger and bigger and bigger, which we pick up, of course, in the book of Acts. So, so the reason why this story is just so dang important, the reason why that we got to take our time with it, is because it is two of the central tenets of the Christian faith find big theological grounding right here. Jesus for the world, and all Jesus does is has to say a word. When Jesus speaks, it's done. That's how big that is. Okay. Moving on. Any questions? You guys questions on this? You guys have been pretty quiet tonight. I'm just rambling for you? Yes. My pontification is just that stunning. It's stunned you all into silence. I mean, this would have been surprising. This would have shocked some people. Jesus hanging out with, for us, it's so, for those of us who have been raised within the Christian context, and even just I'll go so far as to say the world context, the idea of inclusivity and the idea of worldwide or even just a global perspective, I don't know about you, I feel like we were raised with a global perspective, particularly with the rise of the internet, and all that came with globalization in the last, 100 years or so. They would not have had the same, like, they knew the world, make no mistake. They had a big perspective on world. Roman Empire was the world for them. Like, don't get me wrong. They knew there were far off places and so forth. It's not that. But the significance of recognizing that Jesus and God could be intended for the entire world is counter to literally countless generations. I shouldn't say countless, because they actually do count them in Matthew. But historical generations of Jewish thinking, Jewish theology. And this is also what we would consider to be part of the fulfillment of that Abrahamic promise, where God promises Abraham that he and his seed, he and his descendants, will be a blessing to the nations. That he will bless the whole world. And we see that fulfillment happening, here with a Roman centurion officer. It's pretty incredible. Gee, it is cool, Joe. I agree. Jesus was amazed. That is neat. I agree. It's kind of surprising, isn't it? It's just kind of surprising. Chris, I love that Jesus didn't raise his voice to the young man. Raise his voice to the young man. Which one are you talking about? Are you talking about, was it in Matthew? Which one are you talking about? What young man are you talking about, Chris? The young servant. Help me out. Which young man are you talking about? Talks to the crowd. The son. I'm not tracking. You're gonna have to help me. Are you already diving into the widow? Oh, you might be already in the widow. You were reading ahead. I haven't gotten there yet. Oh, you're in the... Gotcha. All right, you're in the next part. I haven't dived into that yet. Sorry. I was still pontificating on the officer. Gotcha, Chris. Gotcha. Yeah. Oh, that was smooth, Chris. That was a great way of saying stop repeating yourself and move on to the next story. Is that what you're doing? That was really good if it was. That was really smooth. Or maybe that's just an unintended consequence. All right, let's read the next story. We got a couple more minutes. Soon afterward, Jesus went with his disciples to the village of Nain, and a large crowd followed him. Let me check something out. Sorry, I wanted to double check on a word. Anyways, all right. So soon afterward, Jesus went with his disciples to the village of Nain. A large crowd followed him. A funeral procession was coming out as he approached the village gate. Jesus is an itinerant preacher, right? So he's walking all over the place. Let's find out. Let's find out where Nain is. Small town. Yeah, I know that. Where? In the plain of Jezreel, on the northern slope of the hill of Morah. 10 miles from Nazareth. Okay. Sure, a gate implies a city wall. This is Anchor Yale Bible Dictionary. Eusebius talks about it. Jerome talks about it. All right, so it's just a random small city. Random small city would have been, near Nazareth, which is farther up north. So it's kind of in that northern area where Jesus is doing all his ministry. A funeral procession comes out, approaches as he's approaching the village gate. The young man who had died was a widow's only son, and a large crowd from the village was with her. Now, you need to know, funerals and funeral processions, they were a big deal, okay? Funerals were not, it's not to say they aren't a big deal now. Please don't mishear me. But a funeral procession was a big deal. And what it looks like to do a procession in the context of that day and age, you got to picture people lined up, crying, wail. You guys familiar with the term wailing? Incessant, loud yelling. Okay, I've had an experience before where there was wailing. It's something else, man. I had to show up. Brief story time with PA here. I was a chaplain in a hospital in Minnesota for a while, and as part of that chaplaincy, I was at a large church. You did a lot of death calls, and I got to receive and respond to a death call from a traditional African family. It was one of the coolest experiences I've ever had. It was something else. You go up to the floor, and I get off the elevator, And literally, I mean, the whole floor, you can hear the experience of wailing emanating from this room, where there must have been 25 people, standing room only, slammed into this tiny hospital room, and beautiful, beautiful people who had these full traditional African garb on. There was a translator there because they didn't speak English. It was something else, man. They were legit wailing. And that comes to my mind when I think of like funeral processions back in the day. You would have a trail of people wailing, just yelling and whooping and hollering and crying. And usually, because it would be these cities and these towns were not terribly large, so everybody shows up. Bear in mind, Nazareth itself, as a reference point for you, would be like a comparable village. And you're talking, 30, 40, max 50 people. So when somebody dies, the whole town shows up and gets together and cries together and weeps together and goes through this whole process together. So there's this, you've got a picture of 50 people lined up behind a litter that has a body on it. And the women are wailing at the top of their lungs, and the men are shouting and stuff. So that's what Jesus is walking up to. Funeral processions coming out of the village as he approached the gate. The young man who had died was a widow's only son, and a large crowd from the village was with her. All right, so everybody's turned out and trying to comfort this widow. Certainly, because the reality, widows were common in a way that more so then than even today. They didn't have healthcare the way we have today. It was not uncommon for life expectancy to be a lot less. But it also means that as a widow, she is totally, utterly, completely dependent upon her son. Again, given the demographics and the context of the day, the whole village has turned out to care for this widow now who has lost her son. There's all sorts of stuff wrapped up in that. Identity, longing, dreams, future, provision, day-to-day, daily bread. There's a lot there, right? When the Lord saw her, that is Jesus, his heart overflowed with compassion. "Don't cry," he said. Then he walks over to the coffin, and he touched it, and the bearers stopped. "Young man," he said, "I tell you, get up." And the boy sat up, and he begins to talk. I love this. Then Jesus gave him back to his mother. Oh, isn't that fitting? We just was Mother's Day this last Sunday. There you go. Trudy, that's fascinating. Trudy just commented that when she was in Santa Barbara, Mexico, a bell tolled in the village to call everyone available to join the procession led by a mariachi band for a funeral for a woman who had never been married. We all joined the procession that ended at the church. Great example, Trudy, right? There's a calling together. There's a community loss. The emphasis on community historically has, if anything, been even greater than it was today. You were further dependent upon community historically. Today, you can drive into your underground garage or whatever you drive into your garage. Garage goes up, garage goes down. You may not feel terribly tied into your community, but historical practice was that you really knew your community very well and were tied into them significantly. So great. Thanks for sharing that, Trudy. Yes. And now, Chris, okay, right? He just talks to the dude. He just talks to the son. He doesn't yell at him or nothing. He just walks over to the coffin. He touches it, and the bearers stop. Now, this is pretty striking. I mean, the fact that Jesus reaches out and grabs a funeral litter is kind of like, dude, no wonder the bearers stopped. Not every day. They must be thinking Jesus is a loony at this point in time. Like, who is this guy? What he's doing? And you got to picture the coming together of two crowds, right? Jesus is not alone. He's with his disciples. So you got Jesus and his crowd coming together with a funeral procession and their crowd. So you have these two crowds coming together. And at the centerpiece of the two crowds is Jesus interacting with a dead man. And just like we saw with the Roman officer and the ability to speak reality into existence, just a word, so also you see the same thing here. Jesus simply makes a declaration, and it happens. Talk about powerful. Jesus literally just walks up to this guy who's dead and says, "Young man, I tell you, get up." This is that whole authority over life and death. This is authority in relation to our composition, our future. This is authority in relation to resurrection and life everlasting. I mean, all that is wrapped up in this simple declaration. Jesus says, "Get up," and the dude gets up. Yeah, Lazarus comes in the John's story, comes in John's. But of course, the same thematic principle. You're absolutely right, Chris. Same thematic principle of like, Jesus shows up and simply says, "Lazarus, come out." And Lazarus comes out. Jesus walks up to this dead young man, says, "Get up," and he gets up. It gives us hope, guys, because, you know, there'll be a day when we're all dead, right? We're dead and in the grave, and Jesus will stand at our tombstone, and he'll say to us, "Hey, rise and shine." I tell you, get up, and we'll get up. That's part of the Christian witness and the Christian promise that we find here. Unsurprisingly, great fear sweeps through the crowd, and they praise God, saying, "A mighty prophet has risen among us." There is a couple examples where prophets do raise people from the dead. The most commonly known one is Elisha. Elisha raises somebody from the dead. Elijah and the widow of Nain. It's not Nain. It can't be Nain. But it's almost identical to that. Anyways, the people are like, it's not every day you see a dude back from the dead, right? So God has visited his people today. This is also, note the theological shift. They have begun to associate divinity, God, with Jesus. They may not recognize that Jesus himself is God in the fullness yet. They're still working in their theological frameworks there, but make no mistake, to say God has visited his people today is also a double meaning for us as readers, because who visited? Well, Jesus did. Jesus is the visitor, right? So to say God has visited his people today is actually a tremendously insightful statement to say, yes, God did visit his people, but in a very real way, not just like in an ethereal way or in you know, through Jesus, so to speak, not in a way that, you know, Jesus was nothing more than a vehicle for God. That's not accurate. To say God has visited his people today is a very clever way in the scriptures of naming and pointing to the divinity of Jesus himself, right? I mean, that's kind of one of the things that's happening here. This is not just Jesus, God working through Jesus, as much as it is a double meaning to say Jesus is God himself. The news about Jesus spreads throughout all Judea and the surrounding countryside. He's working his way south because Galilee is further north. He's working his way further south. Judea is the area of conflict that we think of with as being mostly Jewish and filled with Pharisees. So he's working his way south towards Jerusalem. That's what's kind of slowly creeping along. That's what's happening here. He was up in Capernaum, and now he's shifted further south. Hot dang, it's 8:38, guys. Should have told me to wrap this sucker up. My bad. Sorry about that. All right, we got to be done, guys. Holy cow. You guys have other things to do with your night, don't you? Listen to me gab all day. Hey, thanks for joining. Thanks for being here tonight, guys. Oops, that didn't work so well. Thanks for being here tonight. Thanks for being part of the online community. As always, it's a blast hanging out with y'all. When you do participate in this way, when you choose to show up and choose to be a part of this, you have my gratitude, because it tells me that what we do is valuable. Our time together is always fruitful. And it's a way in which we can be community together within the context of an online following. Whether you're listening to this live or you're listening to this after the fact, whether you're listening to this on YouTube, on Facebook, wherever you're listening to this, I wanted to say thanks for being part of that online community. We are an online and on-site church, so thanks for being part of it. Hey, speaking of online, on-site, coming up on Sunday, silly things Christians say. Going to be tackling another one of those silly phrases that's coming up, so please be sure to come and join us, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10:30 as always. Not only that, but hey, bring somebody. We're a church for those who aren't here yet. Go find somebody who ain't here yet and bring them along. Have them come and be a part of this series. It's been a really good series, a lot of fun. I really enjoy this series. I'm biased, but I think this is just a tremendously important part of the Christian conversation. If you miss any of the series, you might go back and listen to them because they're really, really important things for us to be conscious of and aware of, because we say a lot of silly things as Christian people. You know what I mean? Hey, not only join me on Sundays, but you can join me on Thursday mornings, Tuesday nights, Tuesday night teaching, and then Thursday mornings we got meditation. So if you had fun tonight, great, so glad. Don't forget to join me on Thursday morning for Thursday morning meditation. It is scripture and prayer and Holy Spirit shout outs. Totally different vibe. It's only a half an hour, and it's a totally different kind of gig. It's pulling our Sunday experience into the rest of our week, and so it's a way to take some of the things that we learned and remind ourselves, practice the art and the practice of prayer, and then recognize God's work and activity in the world around us. So join me not only tonight on Tuesday nights, but join me Thursday mornings, if you will, if you find that would be edifying for you. 7:30 a.m. to start your day right. So just want to make a last word. Also, I am on full-scale baby watch. I'm on full-scale baby watch right now, and should be happening any time. Really excited for that. Appreciate your prayers for me and my family as we anticipate baby watch. We had a good appointment with our OB just the other day, yesterday, in fact, just yesterday, and the OB said, yep, anytime you're ready, I'll see you soon. So we're just waiting now. What that does mean, though, is that if I am not on next Tuesday, it is probably because I got a baby, which is very exciting. But if there ain't a baby next Tuesday, I'll be on. So come join me, come hang out with me, and then even after baby does come, we're going to find a way, once things stabilize, we'll be back on rocking and rolling like normal anyways. So, hey, thank you so much for joining me tonight. Thanks for being part of the C3 stream, everybody. Thanks for hanging out, having fun, and doing some Luke and study with me. We'll be picking it up with Luke chapter 7, right where we left off tonight. In the future. So go live some lives, elevate Christ, go be a church for those who aren't here yet. We'll see you guys. Have a great night.